Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season 2 of Conversations in Pop Culture. And before I bring on my guest or introduce my guest, I do want to make it crystal clear that there are a bunch of links up above, including his Kickstarter that is currently being funded, as well as Buy Me a Coffee, which is a way how to support my indie content creation and this show. So if you have money, obviously back the Kickstarter, back my coffee, but more importantly, share this interview around. So without further ado, I have with me comic creator Andrew Russell Birkett. Hopefully, I got your name right.
You
So,
did.
so welcome to the show, and I'm excited.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited too. I obviously care very much about the comic I've read and want people to learn about it.
So obviously you have this comic going on, and it's called Sam's Scams. And try not to say it 10 times fast because it might sound like something else completely. But beyond going seriously here, it is a 75-page full graphic novel that's in color, and I think it has about 20 days, maybe 19 days at this point left on it. So, what is the basic premise for those who might not have already backed it or are saying, "Hey, this sounds interesting"? What's the basic premise of the comic?
So the basic premise is an alien comes to Earth and decides to scam elderly people in Florida in the villages. So I live in Florida and like to make fun of Florida as much as humanly possible in my work. My next project that I'm going to be doing comic related is an anthology of like Florida man stories. So the Florida theme is going to be apparent in some of my comics for sure. And so Sam is basically this pot smoking alien who goes around scamming people. But in the first volume, which is on Kickstarter now, he's basically trying to figure out how to obtain a human partner who he thinks will help make his scams, propelled and kind of make them more valid to these other humans. So it has that human element because he's an alien and he doesn't get fucking human shit. So um, the idea was to be kind of like late night comedy inspired, obviously swear a lot, very vulgar kind of comic that would just be fun and not take itself too seriously. So like I said, his kind of misadventures of finding a human partner is what the first volume's about.
And we're going to obviously dive into this a little bit more in a second here, but where did the inspiration for this come from? Because obviously it is absurdity. It's dealing with making fun of things, but also you have, also some satire, I think it's fair to say, that's in here. And there's some valid points about, old people being susceptible to scams, also old people having money, and well, not every old person is not also not pulling a scam too, which is very interesting. So there's a lot of moving parts. And also, it's very interesting that's from a foreign eye, which is Sam, who's an alien, versus another human scamming. So, where did all this idea come from? What was the inspiration for it?
So oddly enough, I make board games. They're behind me places. But so I started making board games in like 2013, and one of my board game publisher friends and I were talking. My dad was in the hospital at the time, and I realized I wanted to make comics, and I asked him what would kind of be in his alley for what they would publish. And what I typically write, like when I write novels, is about serial killers. So things of that kind of nature, like horror is my kind of genre. So I was expecting that I was going to write something to that end. And so I asked him if that would fit his kind of pitch. And he was like, yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. And then for whatever reason, I just had this idea about an alien coming and scamming people. And I was like, oh man, I like this one. And it's not even close to what he said he would take from me. So I knew, oh, if I work on this project instead of what I know would get published, it's possible that I end up just self-publishing this. But since I've done board games before, I was like, okay, I'm gonna see what I can do and try to self-publish something a little stranger. But I think the kind of main impetus for it was I've always kind of wanted to do uh, like stand-up comedy or something like that. And for like most of my life, I was too socially awkward to where I definitely wouldn't have done that, and I would have been super afraid. And then when I went to the University of Florida, and when I went to school, I wanted to do business plan competitions, and the first part of that is to do a pitch. So I wanted to do this pitch competition, and they basically were like, you have to talk in front of 20 people in this entrepreneurship club meeting. And I was like, yep, talking in front of people, not going to do that. So I basically didn't do it, and then met with the director afterwards and was like, hey, I have this idea for this board game company. Let me pitch it to you. And I pitched it in his office, and then basically built up my public speaking skills through doing that pitch competition. And then I ended up winning for the University of Florida and getting sent to Chicago to pitch. And I ended up going from not wanting to pitch in front of 20 people to having to pitch in front of 200 people. And then it kind of progressively got crazier as I went through school, where in my like junior year, I did the business plan competition at UF, and I had to pitch to like an investor who had invested $100 million into the university. And so I was pitching to all these crazy bigwigs and whatnot. And so now I have that kind of sense that I feel like I could do stand-up comedy, but I thought that comics would be kind of a cool way, and I had never seen a comic that kind of played on this humor as much. And so I read in like Transmetropolitan and stuff of that kind of vein, and was like, maybe I could do something kind of in the not superheroes and traditional comics, and do something that's a little funnier and would be more like what I wanted to do when I wanted to do stand-up comedy. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so this is definitely a long-winded answer. But I love it, and there's so much to dissect about that. And the point that I want to talk about is that obviously this is something that is different, because absurdity is a very tricky situation. I love absurd movies. I love movies that everything gets sort of wrapped up nice and tidy for the most part. I love absurd books. I don't know if you've read Razor Girl by any chance, which is down in Florida, and it's a great book, and it's complete absurdity, and it's part of the Andrew Yancey, which is very weird because I'm named Andrew and you're named Andrew, so obviously we're biased here. But it's such a bad joke. But even going beyond that, it's this idea that picking absurdity is so tricky to write, because you can miss it, and then like this book, and I've read the first 29 pages, for those who were wondering, it is very, very absurd. And we're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff. And so what is that like? Because it is going to be more or less tidied up in a neat bow. And not everybody's going to be okay, but nothing too crazy is going to happen in this entire story. Beyond like, it's not like the world's going to blow up, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not kind of the superhero intense action sequences and whatnot. It's in a way harder to write, and I think that, like I said, I was, when I write novels and that sort of things in that vein, I always kind of geared towards horror. So going the kind of comedic, absurd route was definitely outside of my comfort zone, and I think that is what I really liked about it, is that I was able to do different things and kind of learn the comic medium in a different way than I kind of expected. And I did, in between working on this, other like anthology submissions and whatnot, so I was playing with a lot of different genres. And even though I like a lot of them, I felt like doing the absurd is difficult, but was also significantly more fun for me than some other things. And I felt like I was able to get a story that would get people to laugh, and that they would enjoy, and might not, be as serious, and might not have, as much punching and, big action sequences that comic books kind of are known for with like superhero books, but could still kind of share a different and kind of unique story.
And so to even get into this now, because obviously I think we're sort of beating around the bush, and let's get into Sam, who's the main character. So he is fascinating, and I'm going to just throw this up right there, where I think that says a lot about who Sam is. So Sam is an alien, and then he has a human skin, and you can sort of see that split picture right there. And what even prompted you to, A, build him as an alien, have him as a human, and then it's his job / mission, and he might have been dropped off, or he might have been kicked off his planet. We're not exactly sure. At least I'm not. And he says, well, I have to report back to headquarters but I'm not too sure if his alien crew after 36 years wants him back so quickly.
Yeah,
And
maybe not.
I don't think that that's the key part of this story, but even that idea where he views this almost as a job of scamming people and doing it as a mission, and he's in a human skin, and then also he's pot smoking at the same time, which is also a whole different discussion about an alien, getting introduced to weed. It is just
Yeah.
sort of funny. So, what was this like really starting to build him? Because obviously, we're going to dive into some of his actions without ruining too much.
Yeah, so I guess I always thought it was kind of silly how like when people depict aliens, it's the kind of the same green alien, like it's all the same, and it's like somehow aliens have evolved to just look like one thing forever, um, and kind of behave in this similar way where it seems like most media that aliens kind of just come to Earth and either want to just fight us, or we do something that makes us want them get them to want to fight us, or and that's kind of been the storyline of most alien things, is they're just coming and fighting with humans. And it's like, well, it'd be kind of interesting if their mission was slightly different, that they weren't just killing us, that they're not trying to wipe humans off, but for some reason just wanted to take our money. And then playing with
And
that
it goes
idea.
even further with him as well, because he's like, I'm working for somebody else, and the rich, and my job is to make the rich get richer. And so he's viewing it, and it's very weird. I picked this up, and maybe I'm reading too much into it here, but it's almost like on his planet, if he has a job, and we don't know exactly if he does or he doesn't, or if he was sent here as a mission, we don't know his life expectancy or anything like that. But he says, hey, I'm trying to make the rich richer, which is his bosses. And so it's very interesting because it's very humanistic in a lot of ways, where he is doing a job for somebody else, which is then going to make his bosses richer. But I'm not too sure how his scamming humans does that exactly. But it's just that mentality is so fascinating, which goes to show you that these aliens, if it's true, are very much like us.
That's the kind of another thing that I wanted to play on with the story, is I feel like it's often in alien stories in general, like aliens are these other things, and I think that even when you look at other animals, they kind of evolve similarly to us, and there's a lot of similarities between all kind of different elements. And I feel like if there are aliens out there, that they probably would exhibit at least some similarities to humans. And so I think if there was a smart race of aliens that could learn our languages and could come and communicate with us, that there would definitely be interesting possibilities. But I definitely think that if they were known as an alien, that they would be totally destroyed for science. They would be in a lab somewhere. There's no way we would let them just live peacefully in our society. So I feel like that the human suit kind of goes into that. Like, he knows and realizes when he comes to Earth that the only way he's going to be able to live here is to hide his true identity. So no one can really know that he's an alien. They have to believe that he's this human character. And so he puts on this human suit so that he looks like us, even though in reality he's this weird alien, not a human at all.
And to even go further into that, because obviously he puts on this weird thing where he's a human. He's clearly awkward at the start of his career. And I think it's safe to say that we know that I think he wakes up, and we sort of get, I guess, the ending or maybe even the middle of this story in 2071. But then we go back to, I think, 2035 or 2036, I think. And he's sort of looking for a human partner. And I guess he's at his start of his career when he's on Earth. And he sort of spots this old timer ripping off people and pulling off some crazy scam, and he tries to get him on it, and then that doesn't go well, and then we sort of see what's going on with him and how he might start be raising some suspicions, and there's just a lot of stuff going on. And what the kicker for me, and I think it's what he notices, that the guy Jerry, who he kills by accident, smells when he was alive, but smells less when he's dead. And it's this crazy sort of statement where you're like, oh, this is how this book's going to go. And so it's very interesting how he's interacting with people and how he thinks he needs a human partner to pull off the biggest scam ever. And yet he doesn't know exactly how fragile humans are. And it's also very cool to get that learning curve in there.
Yeah, I thought it would be interesting to kind of show, like, they have done some research, but I feel like if we went to another planet, even if we researched and thought we knew, that we wouldn't really know exactly how those civilizations worked or how their alien people or whatever would kind of operate and what makes them tick. And so I felt like I wanted to play on that with him trying to find a human partner because of his kind of ignorance and lack of understanding of what makes people tick and what would actually help him, you know, get money from these elderly victims that he's trying to get. And so he's able to find, and I felt like this kind of also plays on real life, that, you know, there's plenty of degenerate humans that are doing this sort of thing. And so he's able to kind of find out, like, oh, if I work with one of these people, they clearly know what gets humans to tick and have kind of solved this for me. So he's able to partner up with these people. And like you said, Jerry, unfortunately, rest in peace, was an unfortunate victim of his.
And it even goes further into that, because one of the things that I think, and again, might be reading into it, but it's this idea that Jerry, I think, is either a doctor or he's an old patient himself. And he's in a scooter, but he can walk perfectly fine. And he's selling things to women and he's sort of scamming them. And then obviously that's what's picking up, and that's kind of what gives, you know, Sam his ideas. And it's this entire thing of even just targeting old people, and old people are more susceptible to scams. And that's real in life. And then obviously, I'm sure, and there's plenty of things where I think older people wind up getting scammed. I don't think that's a secret in society. And it's so interesting because that's where it's almost satire to me, is that we have somebody who's a human who's older scamming older people, but then we also have an alien realizing that these people are very, very susceptible. And then it gets even crazier because now these people, old people, are doing some weird shit too. And I mean, they're involved in very sexual acts and orgies. And so maybe the old people aren't so innocent. I mean, they hand somebody and Sam, you know, somewhere in the middle of the book, some oranges, and it says orgy on the oranges. So it's kind of just like this entire dynamic where now it's like, okay, you're pulling a scam on people who are not pure innocent people, but are into some crazy fuckery, for lack of a better word. And it really raises questions. I mean, I can tell you, I have a bunch of questions about this book, but also people are complicated. And not to get, you know, into, you know, people are kinky is where I'm going with this. And not to like make this a sexual podcast, but it's sort of cool when you're scamming people who are not so innocent.
Yeah, and I feel like everyone kind of in Florida has this knowledge that the Villages is one of the highest STD rates in the United States. So that this old person home ends up having a lot of these kind of orgies and kind of weird older people doing, you know, like you said, less moral and weird things. And
if you're 80 and you want to go catch an STI, be my guest.
Yeah, exactly.
You're long past your prime.
And I guess that's what they think. So that's why their STD rates are ridiculously high in the Villages. But I thought that would be kind of interesting to play on and to include. And I thought that in the comedy format that you can include it a lot easier than anything else. So I was like, oh, that would be a kind of funny transition as if he ends up going there.
But you know, it's also real. That's the other thing too, is that, you know, the saying is that fact is stranger than fiction in a lot of ways. And this is real, where I didn't know the Village was an STD, STI, you know, hot spot in you know, the United States, at the very least, and possibly in the world. But I do know that, you know, weird shit happens in old homes. You know, things get interesting. There's plenty of love triangles. You can make an entire soap opera out of this and never run out of content. where, I mean, there's a great Malcolm in the Middle episode where Reese is working in, and then Reese is trying to hook everybody up, and he winds up creating 20 love circles out of nothing within minutes, and then he's completely shocked at what he did. And it's really, really funny, but it's also very real. And then you introduce a bunch of other stuff in there that happens to old people, and then you create this entire thing, and then you get an alien to do it, and then we get into Earl, which is fascinating also, because Earl is sort of not an old guy, looks fairly young, and well, he's definitely encouraging this orgy stuff, and we have people walking around in G-strings and all sorts of crazy shit going on, and got plenty of sex toys and everything in between. So obviously, and I don't really know what happens beyond that because I only got 29 pages, but I can imagine that, you know, there's some stuff going on, and this might give everybody a clue of what might happen or might not happen. So I left it up briefly for a reason, because I want people to back this project. So what is that like? Because that's going to be a big thing for the rest of the issue.
Yeah, so it definitely gets crazy. It's the first 29 pages are certainly crazy, and it gets crazier, I guess. But I wanted to incorporate what I thought would be real life, and so I'm sure this one I'm not 100% factually sure about, but
you don't have firsthand experience.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm pretty confident that there's some entrepreneur out there who's tuned into the fact that there's a bunch of STDs in the villages who's like, I could sell them some shit. And so I thought that would kind of have this weird character who just comes in there trying to make a quick buck would kind of work with the human element, because I can guarantee that someone somewhere has been like, I can make money doing this, and will sell whatever would make them money. I know plenty of entrepreneurs who are like that, who will just sell whatever makes them the most money. And so I thought that would be kind of this character. It would be his next human partner would be the human who's just trying to make money as fast as possible, only cares about money, and that's kind of his whole MO.
And then obviously there's the entire reaction and interactions between the two of them. Sam is extremely vulgar. Sam is just as bad probably as Earl. And I'm sure that it's going to be very interesting what's going on. And I sort of threw that thing up there, and that may or may not be where it's going or just what Sam is thinking. And obviously it's very interesting. And remember, guys, this is a coming of age story, okay? That's all this is. It's a coming of age story for a scammer. I want to make that crystal clear. That's all this is. It's not a bad story. It's a perfectly healthy coming of age story for Sam. So that's all this is. And so I don't want to talk too much more about the actual story, because obviously there's a lot going on, and it is absurdity. And if we start diving more into the weeds, I think I spoiled a little bit, but I don't think I gave too much away. Because I think the next, 35 pages or so, if we start going through some of that stuff, what's going to wind up happening is it ruins the absurdity once you know of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of content in this kind of first volume. So there's a lot that people will uncover, and I wanted to let them, I have kind of released the first few pages, the first like 28 or 29 pages on my website as well, so that people can get an idea of what the story is before they back it.
And so I want to tell, because I want people to actually back it. I want people to say, oh man, it sounds super interesting, and let me back it. But what I'm curious about, because now I want to dive into Inside Baseball, because I love the business side of comics. I don't know how much you know about my background, but I am on the comic book investing side, and I'm in the speculation market. I buy and sell a lot of comics every year. And I buy everything from a $10 book to, $400 book and everything in between. So I am curious. And also, obviously, for those who don't know, I'm booking a variant sometime in the next 6 to 8 months. So I'm about to get into the business side and creation side as well. So I am curious, why do a 75-page mini graphic novel or small graphic novel versus a 24-page book, or even like a 30-page book? Because obviously in full color, because it's a little bit of a different market.
Yeah.
And also there's good things about it and bad things about it, but it is definitely sort of 3 comics in one. And there's more risk to some degree with it as well, but there's also less risk because you don't have to worry about story breaks as much. You only have to worry about 1 story break versus 3 story breaks. You only have to do 1 Kickstarter to get 75 pages done versus 2 or 3. So obviously, what prompted that? Because there's good things and bad things with that model.
So I actually wrote it as 3 issues. So it's written and has semi breaks within each issue. So the first issue is 28 or 29 pages. The second issue is like 20 pages, and then the third issue is like 28 pages or something like that. I was going to just launch the first issue, and kind of it got delayed between me working on a bunch of other projects. Like I said, I do other board game stuff and whatnot as well. So I had another Kickstarter that was coming up, and so it was delayed anyways. So I started working on the second issue, and by the time I did that, I was like, I'd rather, instead of doing 3 separate Kickstarters, I'd rather just wait a little while and get a few issues under my belt. And also I thought it would show a little bit more that I'm invested in this to our backers, and that I'm going to keep making content for this, that I've already made 3 issues, and there's like just 1 issue, and it's going to go away forever.
So obviously you've done other Kickstarters for board games. I don't know if you did another Kickstarter, if this is your first Kickstarter for a comic, but Kickstarter is a fascinating platform, and it's good and bad in a lot of ways. And obviously doing more Kickstarters can be extremely beneficial, but it could also be very difficult once you get to the second or third one, because people will back a first issue, but then they might not come back. And people might come into the second one wanting the first issue, which you could always reprint, but then it just becomes complicated and it can become a very big business headache. And so how do you feel about Kickstarter, and even in that regard? And then I have a follow-up question that's sort of relevant to this.
So I co-published 1 comic, a graphic novel project that was kind of similar length to this. It was more of a mini, like 75-page graphic novel. I have.
But that wasn't crowdfunded, right?
It was, but I was through. My friend Andre wrote it, and I was just the co-publisher. So I just helped facilitate the Kickstarter mainly, and then he helped deliver the rewards, and it was all under his Kickstarter account and whatnot. And I did the same with another board game project. So with those, I've done like 7 projects that I've successfully funded at this point. And then the 8th is Sam Scams.
You know how complicated Kickstarter can be.
Yeah.
And obviously comics and board games, while they're cousins, they are different.
Correct. And so the board games honestly get significantly more.
We're going to talk about that. You know where I'm going with this. I think you do.
Yeah. So board games get significantly more backers and raise bajillion more dollars than comics. And so the main reason, honestly, that I added it as 1 trade is I could afford and wanted to make the 3 issues anyways. And so even though it was more money up front paying the art for 75 pages versus doing 28 pages, I didn't want to spend the time doing 3 separate Kickstarters.
You do also think that it was just time, and also it's the idea that if I do 3 separate Kickstarters, I have to do issue 1, then I have to fulfill issue 1, and I'll give you the scenario, and you can stop me at any point. But let's say all the artwork was done, and you just broke into 3 issues. You can't just, as soon as you do a 3-week or 4-week campaign, and then as soon as that's done, jump right into issue 2 without it being delivered. You got to sort of get it delivered out to printers, and maybe you could have a turnaround time of 6 weeks from when, the Kickstarter ends, and get it out, which is pretty quickly. I think you would agree with me on that. If you have a 6-week turnaround time and you're running a Kickstarter, that's massively impressive. For anybody, it's very impressive for a bunch of comic companies to do a 6-week turnaround time in general. So obviously, but then as soon as you're done with that, then you have to wait another 4 weeks for the next issue to get done. And so now we're looking at, maybe a year worth of work, I think is fair to say, versus if you did all of it at once, it's already in a trade paperback floppy, and there's no single issues to have to deal with. You eliminate 4 projects and you put them into 1, because at some point you would have to put it into a collected edition, which is what people want after a while. So I think that it's just massively in which that you basically saved yourself a lot of time.
Correct. And so when my goal was always to do 4 Kickstarters a year, and that's between my other projects. So I sign board games and board games. So I'm working on artwork and trying to line up those projects. And like I said, since they tend to produce a lot higher revenues, I didn't want to tie up too much of my time on doing a bunch of things to get to the eventual same end goal. I ultimately want to create the best physical product possible. And with the trade, I can make it a little higher quality. I can do better paper stock and whatnot. And so,
and so to even go off of that, because I think you alluded to it already, is that board games and comics also are very different in that regard. Where comics, and I just have to go get my dog in 1 second. She's gonna join us,
no problem.
little princess. And come on, Hopi, you're about to be a star. Excuse me, everybody. I'll go get my dog. Okay, Hopi, we're about to do this. Sorry, everybody. She's not happy. See, it's all right, Hopi. Okay, so as I was stating, I say hello, Hopi.
What's up, puppy?
She's a princess, is what she is. So as I was stating, obviously board games tend to do very well on Kickstarter. Comics can do well, as we've seen with Keanu Reeves, Scott Snyder. I know a bunch of people like Tom Hutchinson does very well. And so, but why do you think board games do better than comics for the most part? I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah. So I haven't checked in the last few years, but as of a few years ago, board games were like by far Kickstarter's largest category. They raise more money. The average project backer count is higher than other categories. It kind of like unanimously.
So comics, for those who don't know, comics is one of the growing platforms on Kickstarter significantly. By far, it's also one of the only platforms that grew during COVID. It's also one of the only platforms that did really well while every other sector did not do well. I don't know about board games. Board games might have been very similar because people who like board games spend good money on it. And people love board games, in which that it's just a type of person. Because I don't know if you know who Tyler Carpenter is, but people in the comic world have money. People in board games have money. People who play Dungeons and Dragons have money. It's just that they're not going to shout their money for something stupid and ridiculous, and that's not, good quality. Including myself, I spend good money on comics, but I'm expecting a certain type of quality with it. So, but continue. Sorry for interrupting.
No, absolutely. I think that's kind of key. Board gamers, I don't want to say they're snobby, but we definitely care about the quality. I've definitely bought projects where I was like, where did they manufacture this? What did they do?
Also, it's the idea behind it as well.
Correct, and making sure the game mechanisms are something that's interesting and not broken. And so I went from some of my projects I designed myself, some of them I published from other designers, but when I was doing projects for board games, the average backer count is higher. And I think a big part of that is honestly just the community around it. So there's a ton of Facebook groups for board games and sort of other online communities. And I feel like just a lot easier and less likely for creators to just talk about their own project. They're talking about other games.
So to even talk about that, because I post in a bunch of groups in the comic realm.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happens to me, and I might get flack for this, and it's okay. I'll take the hit on this. This is my idea, so I'm going to take the hit on it. If you get in trouble, they can all blame it on me. But a lot of what happens is that creators are just promoting their own stuff, and they're not promoting each other. In a lot of these groups, it's just a bunch of creators, and there's nobody who's not a creator who says, hey, I just want indie comics. And it's a big problem in the comic world. When I go into comic book investing, we're all talking about comic book value, and we're actually exchanging information. And it's a big problem, I think, in the indie comic world. I'm not a board game guy. I play Catan. I play, But I can't think of games. I've played like Forbidden Island.
Okay.
I played those games. I've played I forget the castle game that I played. A fun game where somebody's the Black Knight and is trying to kill everybody. I forget the game's name off the top of my head, but I haven't played in a while. I know Santine Phoenix, and I backed her project just recently, and she's definitely like the queen of D&D. And
Yeah.
so I'm not as familiar though, because I'm not a big board game player. But I would
Yeah.
imagine it's very different because people are actually talking about the game and not, man, my project's coming out. My project's coming out. That's what comics are right now.
Yeah. So I think that's the big issue, right? So with board games, I think you have a few excuse me, a few things going for it. So one, just naturally, there's some board games that you play solo, but for the most part, board games are a communal experience, right? Like I'm getting around the table and I'm playing with other people, and so that social experience.
You're trying to screw your friends from not winning in a board game.
Yeah, exactly. So that experience is kind of shareable, right? Like I'm already sharing it with the people at my table, but then if I open that up to an online community, I can say, hey, look, I'm playing this game right now, and then people who have also played that game can talk about it. I feel like a lot more avenues for people to get into discussions. And I think with comics, I found that in some of the groups, some people will ask for recommendations and talk about books they're reading and what they're excited about. But there's a lot less of that than the board game industry. And to be fair, I honestly think other creators in board games, like as a creator, I will talk about other people's board games to help them. And I don't see that as much with comics. I think there are some.
Problem. It's a big problem. So I run a small comic group, and the whole point of the group, and I'm very open about it, is that I just need a pipeline to interview people. That's the only reason why I created the group. There's a few other podcasters who use it too, and the only reason why I have creators is because I'm running out of people to interview, and I just want a bullpen to pull from at any given point, and they post their projects, which makes 100% sense. So for me, my group is a tool. I don't really care what's in my group. Minus, I just don't want anything eBay posted or any sales. But if you want to post your project every day, I'm okay with that. Because I'm just looking saying, okay, who am I going to interview and where can I pull from? Because I'm trying to do my show. And then if I could spend 5% less time having to find guests, solves the problem for me because that's 5% more I can do what I want with. But a lot of it is it's also exchanging of things in the comic world. And I don't know, again, about board games, but I go into other groups that have nothing to do with this, and there's less of that. And I think it's a big problem. And I think that also, it's that, and also, it's just also there's a lot of just looking for support to get my project overfunded in these groups as well. Where I think with board games, there's just a discussion about, hey, I'm playing this, and after the game is funded, people want to play it, or they say, hey, where can I pick it up now that it was funded on Kickstarter because it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and to an extent, it's easier to get into distribution afterwards because obviously with comics, like if you're not in Diamond, you're nowhere. With board games, there's like 5 main distributors. So even though it's difficult to get in there, there's consolidators that sell to distributors. And so it's a little easier even after the Kickstarter process to sell board games. But I think it's more difficult from a manufacturing perspective, right? Like a comic book, for the most part, like if I wanted to, I could go print this in the US or Canada, and it might be slightly more expensive than if I, went and printed something in China. But for a comic, that's feasible. For a board game, it's not. So I have to print in China for my games. It's just like 100% a necessity that the US manufacturers cost 3 times more, and I couldn't sell the product for enough money. So I would lose money, and it just doesn't make sense.
The only time you could do it in the US is if you did over $100,000 on a Kickstarter. And even then, the margins would be so tight.
Yeah. And so with big board games, and the bigger the board game, and the less feasible it is. So the more different components, China's just more adept to making that kind of stuff. And so because of that, I think there is like a little bit more of a hurdle to launching a board game project. You have to set up all these manufacturing. You have to understand international shipping and logistics, which to be fair, honestly, none of us really understand. We just act like we do. Um, I've done several products. I have no idea what I'm doing there.
So I've only shipped internationally once in a comic, and it was onto an army base, which is technically U.S. It was out into the middle of the ocean. So you're shipping a $200 comic book out into the middle of an ocean to a Navy officer. Really cool experience. Technically, it's U.S. soil, but it flew over an ocean. And I don't know if anybody knows how that works. So briefly to explain how that works is the way the mail works on a U.S. Navy ship is that it gets, they bring a bunch of mail to the closest Army land base, and then the post office has a helicopter, essentially almost like an Army helicopter, that lands on that Navy ship with your mail. It's super cool. And it sounds crazy where it is airdropped essentially. It's not airdrop, but that and it's got the post office colors. It's the only helicopters the post office uses. And it's super
cool. I didn't know that.
The Navy guy, I don't know if he was an officer, he was super stoked. Very cool thing, but I will never do it again. Because it is so complicated, and it is so just like, how do you do this? And
it's very expensive to ship internationally.
I mean, it wasn't even that expensive. Maybe it was like $5 more, but also I'm shipping to a Navy ship.
Yeah,
so China or India. But
yeah, so normally the post office can handle that kind of stuff. It's more when you're going like, I've shipped my board games to Afghanistan. I've shipped them to Singapore, all kinds of places. So
it's easy to ship to Canada. It's a little bit expensive, but Canada is not that hard. It's shipping to Afghanistan. The UK is a bitch to ship to, but it's probably not that hard because it's so Western. It's when you start shipping into Eastern Europe and beyond, it gets a pain in the ass.
It's a lot of money and customs forms and all kinds of stuff. And so I've done this before, but like what traditionally happened with board games, because they produce more money, is you basically just say, hey, Chinese manufacturer, send these games to like 5 different hubs. So I would send it to a company in Australia, I would send it to a company in the UK, and then they would deliver the rewards to the backers in those countries. So I never actually physically touched any of the Kickstarter inventory. It went to all these fulfillment companies. And that obviously is expensive. But for board games, it's more feasible. With comics, you would have to raise a ton of money for that to make sense. But so that's kind of how that always worked. And it's a lot. It is certainly a daunting challenge. And I think that might possibly add to the camaraderie with other publishers. Like, they understand all these challenges. So all of us kind of relate to one another. And I think with comics, I mean, we kind of do. Like, I see other comic book creators like just trying to market and trying to learn how to market their book and whatnot. And
but here's the thing. So my last interview on Wednesday, we spent like 45 minutes actually talking about the business. And most comic creators are horrific with money, even the old guys and the new guys. And my business model is I buy and sell comics on eBay. So if a book cost me $100 to buy it when I bought it, and I sell for $200, eBay takes 13%. Shipping is $10. So I immediately take out about $40 off of that. Then I pay myself back, and then I'm left with $60 to $70, and I immediately pay myself the $70. And so nothing is growing. But then, all of a sudden, because I understand that I have to pay myself, a lot of comic creators, they don't do that, because they don't understand. And maybe they make their bonus money at cons because they overprint their book and sell it at a convention, just the cover A or some of the covers from the Kickstarter, and then they're done. But it's the idea that a lot of them aren't making a lot of money from comics. I know people who have made like $50,000 on Kickstarter, but they have 15 books that they had to pay in print. It's expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the interesting thing, so what I always did with my board games, which is a little harder probably with comics, but my goal was always to break even on the Kickstarter but print a ton of extra copies.
That's what everybody does on comics.
Yeah, and so I would print a ton of extra copies. I would sell those through distribution normally, and I would make, you know, whatever amount of money on my projects that I wanted to make. So I would pick, you know, whatever percentage can go through distribution, because I get a way lesser percentage. I'm making like 33% of MSRP instead of MSRP, and then I would set a certain percentage aside to sell at conventions so that I get this overall number that I'm looking for, right? I think the difference.
So when I pick a variant, I have a business plan. 40% is going to go one way, the other 60 is going to go the other way, and the goal is to break even as quickly as possible, and then have enough inventory that then I could sell at leisure for whatever price I want to. But also what I want to do is I want to sell as much as I can very quickly, but I don't want to oversaturate myself. I have a number that I want to hit between what it is, and depending on the artist, that dictates. But I want to hit between two numbers, because anything below that number, so I need to, if the entire expenditure is $1,500, I need to make over $2,500. Otherwise, it's not worth my effort and time. Because Shitley can go take $1,500 and make that exact same amount of money in the stock market within a year, just on dividends alone, if I wanted to. And dividends alone, and then selling the actual underlying stock with if it's a good growth stock, I can make easily $900 very, very quickly, or make $1,000 very quickly with very little risk. So obviously I have to hit a certain number for it to be even profitable for me or worth my effort. And so that's something that I think a lot of comic creators don't understand, is that they don't understand the business side of it. I think you understand that you have to hit a certain number so that it makes economic sense for the effort that you put in.
Yeah. And I think the other difficulty that I see a lot with excuse me, comics is you have a lot of creators that aren't able to sell in large volume, right? So you have creators who are printing in very small volumes and paying really, really close to what they sell their comics for. Like I've talked to comic creators that are selling their comics for like $4, and I asked them what it cost them, and it's like $3. I'm like, yeah.
And also, you see indie creators selling a book for $10 at a con. I've been to a con where somebody was selling me a book for $10, and I'm looking and I'm saying, I legitimately can go on Midtown Comics, buy my books, and buy Batman for $250. And so I could buy 4 of what DC, IDW, Marvel, and Images books, which are by top people, and you're brand new. I get that you're indie, but you're printing these are really expensive if you want to make 50% margins. And my problem is that $10 for an indie book is super, super pricey if it's a 24 or even if it's a 30-page book.
Yeah, and
it's a big problem. Bad business.
Yeah, you have people kind of shive to the one extreme or the other. They either charge too low for what it costs them, which typically is just because they're buying from the wrong printer, realistically, or they're buying from the wrong printer and they realize that they need to make some money, and then they charge way too much, and like you said, it doesn't compete with other things.
Or the third thing is that they don't have a choice, because if you're only printing 250 copies, this isn't a secret. Scout, if I want an exclusive variant for 250 copies, it's $4.75 for a variant per variant. And then if I go up to 501, it drops down to 450. So if I want to make 50% margins, I have to sell a variant at $10 or more. I'm looking to sell my variants for more, because I'm factoring in my artists. Now I'm looking at a $15 to $20 price point, because I just want to make more money, and I think it's worth the money I want to do it, especially if there's only 250 of them out there. Once the 250 are gone, I'm not printing another 250 if it's a variant, and then it becomes what it becomes. But that's also different when it's a variant, and it's not, and I'm just using Scout as an example, because that's public. That's not secret for anybody who's interested. So obviously, I just think comics are so interesting. But at the same time, I also think that a lot of creators don't even know how to utilize their IP correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a Redbubble t-shirt shop. I'm not even a creator. I hired somebody from Bangladesh to do my art for like $70 on Upwork, and he did it in a week. I legitimately can go, if I wanted to and I had the capital, I could legitimately order 100 designs and have 100 designs on Redbubble twice a week if I wanted to, with no capital minus the design costs. And I just think a bunch of creators aren't intelligent enough. And nothing against comic creators, but they don't even know how to be businessmen. Like you're a business guy.
I don't know if it's intelligence as much as I think the problem with a lot of
I'll walk back my statement. I'll walk back my statement just so I don't get attacked and you don't get attacked. I think a lot of somebody said to me, the most creative people, comic people, are deemed as some of the most creative people in the world in everything but being creative in business. And I think that's the problem. Is that I was on an interview with somebody and he said, "I'm not a businessman. I'm doing comics." But I said to him, "But you are a businessman because your comic is a business. My eBay store is a business. Me booking a cover is a business. Me doing this t-shirt design was a business decision. It had, now I want the shirt for myself, but I put it up on Redbubble because I'm making $4 per t-shirt being sold. But what I'm really making my money on is I'm making less money, but I have no capital minus my $70. So in 14 or 15 shirts, I break even."
Yeah.
And that's what I think people in comics don't understand, is that you've run the numbers on your board game, and if you want to make 10,000, you reverse engineered what you want it to do.
Yeah. And I honestly I do understand, and I think that the difficulty is that a lot of creators are, at least indie creators, are doing this part-time, have some other full-time job, and don't have the time to put into everything. And I think that it's easy, and a lot of creators end up swaying towards, let's do the thing I like, which is creating stuff, and then don't do the things that aren't as fun, like learn how to market their product. Or
And that's why they need to hire a business partner who wants to do the marketing. So I love marketing Kickstarters. I love doing podcast interviews. I love booking people on podcasts. I love understanding how to get something in front of somebody's eyes and doing social media content. And it's like, people should be giving me a piece of their Kickstarter. And if I do what I want to do, which is grow a 30,000 email list, you better give me a piece of your Kickstarter, whether that's 10% or 5% is up for grabs. But if somebody has a 50,000 person email list and you're not paying them or giving them a piece of your Kickstarter to put their name on your email list, even if they blast out your email list once and you get funded in an hour and you get funded legitimately $10,000 on a $5,000 project, it's worth the 10% or 15 or even 50% you gave them because it made you. And if they blast it out again, I mean, and that's what I think creators just don't understand, is they don't want to give up more of their work. But guess what? You don't want to give up your work when you're the creator. But if somebody's bringing you an extra $5,000 and all you have to do is give them $500, or you give them a piece of the IP, where if we sell this IP to Netflix for $1 million, you're getting a $100,000 check. I mean, it's a no-brainer because you just became made. And I think that's what people don't understand in this sector, is they don't want to give something to not a writer or the artist. And it's the stupidest thing, because sometimes in life, the most important person is not the writer or the artist on a comic. It's not. It's the person who actually got you funded.
yeah, I mean, ultimately, in my day job, one of the most important people in the organization is the sales guy who sells all of our shit. If he didn't exist, then my job wouldn't exist, and 99% of the other jobs in the company wouldn't exist. Sales are obviously the key with any business. Obviously, in creative industries, there's a lot of people who are willing to take bigger risk, and some even willing to lose large sums of money just because they want the vanity of having their name on something. Which again, I get, as a creator, I definitely want my name out there and understand why people are so adamant
But nobody, I'll give you an example. I'm just going to throw this out there. If I legitimately had an email list of 20,000 people, I don't want my name on your book. I just want an equal share or an equal distribution component of it. That's called the back end. I don't need credit for your comic work. I don't need credit on your board game. But you know what it is? If all of a sudden we're selling $30,000, I deserve a piece of that. If I brought you to the dance, and if you give somebody a piece of that, what you're essentially saying is, you're saying either I'm going to pay you up front, or I'm going to give you an equity position, which is just another way how to structure it. Look at Image Comics. Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan have an equity split in Saga. If he paid her instead per page, it would not be as a lucrative a deal for her versus equity. Equity, and this is what I think indie creators don't understand, is they don't understand equity versus pay. Pay is great if you want to own it, but sometimes equity is better if it saves you $3,000, and maybe the equity deal in the future is going to be worth $18,000, and it will only cost you $9,000 to pay your artist, but now you have that $9,000 to actually pay somebody to market your project. So you may,
yeah, it's super important, and I think it's weird kind of with comics that it's not as prevalent, because I think that with board games it's a lot more common, like Backer Kit even, and Gelop and all these kind of marketing agencies, because the dollar figures are higher, will work with board game kind of creators and do
Backer Kit is now big. So I backed in the last year some pretty big projects. I backed the Vinica by J.P. Roth and Dawn Mateague. I backed the Tony Shalhoub from AEW's book, and both those projects did over 100,000. I've also backed Tom Hutchinson, who typically on average is anywhere from 28 to 34,000. I've backed, I'm backing Isaac Fox, which is probably going to cross about 25,000, all said and done. But then I backed projects that have crossed maybe like 6,200 or 2,500. And if you look at the projects that have crossed bigger numbers, it's either that they were marketed very well or those people have big followings. Like Dawn Mateague and JP Roth really didn't market anything. I backed Santine Phoenix's project, and that had little marketing, didn't have a lot, but obviously Santine is well known in the community. And there's also a lot of press behind it. A lot of very, very famous people were involved in that. Same thing with the AEW project. So, but the Dawn Mateague, she just has 70,000 people who like her. JP Roth has a lot of people. Ebass was involved in that. And there was other people, and obviously I was pushing it out hard, and people from Zenoscope, who Dawn works for a lot, were pushing it hard, and Brian Polito pushed it out hard. And so obviously, but I think that big projects do well. I just think it's all about marketing. And I think that's the biggest problem with most projects on Kickstarter right now, especially in comics, because I think indie creators don't understand marketing. I think board game companies do. It's easy to market a board game because this is fun. In comics, everybody's competing for the dollar, and nobody says, man, it's a great project.
Yeah, and I think it's prevalent in a lot of different things that you'll notice. Like, you could go to any one of my board game projects, and it's going to have like hundreds of comments on the Kickstarter itself. But you look at any, even big comic book projects, and there's like 4 comments. Like, people don't comment. People aren't, for whatever reason, I guess, in the comic space, tend to not be like as vocal about their support of things as the board game industry. Like, they share that with the world. They're like, look, I've just backed this project, and I comment here.
I'll be honest. I'll position my gripe. What's even crazier is that I have Buy Me a Coffee, and I was going to talk about this tomorrow night anyway, if I'm on somebody's show, which is comic. I don't know if I'm going to be on the show or not, because they're just like, oh, it's okay, sweetheart, we're almost done. Anyway, it's this idea that people will trade backs, which doesn't really help anybody because it's not bringing in anybody new, and all you're doing is helping people get over if they back your thing. But nobody will back the infrastructure like me, and it's a real problem where a bunch of people watch this show and nobody backs the infrastructure. And I'm saying to myself, like, you want your stuff out there, and this thing gets distributed relatively out to places. I have enough connections, and you'll back somebody's Kickstarter, but you won't back the infrastructure. And then you ask why we're having problems in the comic world, and why your book is only doing $500 over your goal, and that you're getting it published, but just barely. Well, maybe you ought to back the infrastructure first and foremost, and then maybe you ought to back the next 10 people who have infrastructure, and maybe it'll actually work. It's a real problem, but I digress. That's a big tangent. And that's like an hour-and-a-half conversation I would love to have on somebody else's show, and we'll eventually go through that with a bunch of people. But I do want to talk about your rewards, because that's what we're here for. And this is my favorite part because it's picture time. So obviously you could get the digital stuff. So if you're like me and have no money, digital is the way to go. And that it's a PDF, and you can take it wherever you want to go. And if you want to be eco-friendly, digital is the way to go. Now, if you would like to kill a tree, I believe this is the way you do it for
Yeah.
$12. So double it, which I don't know how you're printing so cheaply, but that's not the point. And so that's the other thing. And then this is a variant by Nicholas Torres, and that's kind of cool to have a variant as well as the PDF, so you actually don't have to ruin your nice copy for $15, which is still pretty cheap. And then for $25, I think you could have some other stuff, and I don't know exactly what's in this version.
You get one of each copy, so you get the variant and the normal cover, so both physical and the PDF. I tried to keep them very affordable.
And then there's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then you will grow out your hair longer again if enough people buy this.
Exactly. It only took me 4 years to grow it out the last time. If enough people back it, I'll do it again. 4 years.
And one of the things that I think is very important about this is that, so I know nothing about Kickstarter, so I'll hop onto the call too if you would like me. And I could talk about media if anybody's interested in that, and actually how to book somebody or even how to be a guest in somebody's podcast. I'm more than happy to extend if you want to hit me up for that. But I know nothing about backing and building a Kickstarter. Kickstarter is very interesting. I understand what Kickstarter is. It's a funnel. And it's very cool with a lot of exits. But again, I know nothing about how to build a Kickstarter, and I believe this is sort of the way on how to do that. If you don't have a creative problem, you just have a Kickstarter problem, this is your answer in a lot of ways to solving that, because I think you'll provide a lot of insight into how to copyright, how to set up your rewards. Yeah. I don't know how familiar you are with BackerKit, but that's a new thing. So, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but obviously BackerKit is very interesting. And so obviously I think you could help with that, because sometimes somebody says, hey, I know my project, I don't need help as a writer. And I'm sure you could also offer some writing advice as well, but more of saying, hey, how do we build this thing out? Because it is important to properly set up your Kickstarter. And that's, I think, your specialty in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I went to school for marketing, and I think that's an area that people commonly struggle with, and which is why I kind of posted that as the main option of what people could use the hour for. But obviously I am a writer and can do editing and whatnot, so if people wanted to use it for the other stuff, they could. But I think, like we talked about, that building that community is something that's really, really important and something that people often miss. And so teaching them and guiding them through the whole process, it can be daunting to start a campaign and not know kind of where everything's going to happen. And so understanding how to set up the rewards, what manufacturers to use, and all that kind of stuff can help make sure that you don't lose money or make the same stupid mistakes that I made when I started.
or I'll go more basic. Even just how to, word choice, your video, stating what to bold, how long it should be, how many rewards you should have, because you only have, I think, 6 or 7. I mean, there are Kickstarters that have legitimately 15. There are Kickstarters that have 35. And there's advantages to all of that. And there's also disadvantages to all of that. And it can go both ways. And obviously, this Kickstarter, and no disrespect, but the fact that you have fewer choices means that there's probably less moving parts. And also, when I'm looking at your Kickstarter, I'm like, okay, I got 5 choices, and they're all pretty cleanly laid out to me. There's nothing complicated about your Kickstarter, except it's what cover do you want? Yeah. Exactly. That's what this is. It's not like, do you want a metal card? Do you want a bookmark? Do you want a haircut? It's like, do you want me to sell you a bridge in Brooklyn? It's nothing of that, or do you want 10 different variants? It's saying there's 1 or 2 or 3 variants, and that's what you get pretty much. And it's Ben Dunn does this with Ninja High School. The swimsuit hardcover just came out, where it was legitimately like 6 options. You get a soft cover, a hardcover, you get sketched in it, you cannot get sketched in it, or you can get a digital version of it. What do you want? You have 5 choices.
Yeah, I like to follow the business mindset of keep it simple, stupid. KISS is something that they kind of teach in business school. That the more options you present, the easier it is for me to go to your Kickstarter page and not do anything, because I'm overwhelmed. So with board games, it was always eliminating as many reward. I mean, it's the same with writing or anything. You wouldn't write 8,000 pages of a story when it only needed 80. You dwindle it down and get it to where it's the most punchy and the best kind of pacing you can. And it's the same with Kickstarter. You want to make it as simple for someone to buy your thing as possible. And so eliminating some of those needless reward tiers that one person's going to back makes it easier for me to go to your page and say, all right, that's what I want. Versus looking and being like super overwhelmed.
And I'll throw this out there is that if you have a lot of stuff, this is what backer kit's for. Because once somebody has already pledged, this is called the upsell. So yeah. I love funnelytics. I love funnels. I understand funnels. I'm going to be building a business on a funnel, and there's going to be an upsell, but I want to make my entry point super easy. Because once I get you in, if you don't want the upsell, I already made the sale.
Yeah.
Because once you make one sale and you're committed and you are not interested in any of the upsells, that's cool because I made my sale, but now I have all your information and you can come back and buy these stuff later. And that's the same thing. This is what BackerKit does very, very effectively, is that you could buy something for $10 and you say, oh man, I did want that $20 variant. Let me add it on. And that's when you can have the whole kitchen sink, everybody. That's when you have the whole kitchen sink. But that's just my view on it. But then again, if you actually have an eBay store, you should do the exact opposite. You should have as many products as possible because you never know who's looking at your eBay store. There's 350 million people in the United States at one point or another. And I have a product under the sun.
I think that's why people probably put so many reward options is like, on a lot of platforms, it would be better to have more.
So I'll give an example. Sorry to interrupt. Your Kickstarter should not be Target or Walmart. Your Kickstarter should be, I'm trying to think of a store that sells, it should be your local ice cream shop that has 10 flavors. That's what your Kickstarter should be, I think. It should be your local ice cream store that has 10 flavors where you have enough of a choice, but you don't have an abundance of choice. Or maybe you have 6 choices or 8 choices. So you have some choice, and your backer kit should be Target or Walmart.
Yeah.
My eBay store, an eBay store should be Walmart or Target. It should not be choices on an eBay store. That makes no sense.
It's shotgun. The more products you can put on eBay or platforms like that, the more you could potentially sell. And I think add-ons and like you said, BackerKit is the perfect way to do that with Kickstarter. So someone goes to your page, they say, I want this. They have a super simple choice. They buy it, and then they say, oh, there's these other things I can buy later. Like you said, once you already have the sale.
I would love to test this. I would love for somebody to run a 2 reward tier Kickstarter. The digital and the physical. Then they BackerKit the shit out of it. They openly say that, hey, I am legitimately giving you a digital choice and you get no access to BackerKit, or you get the physical cover A, it's $5. They're going to make no money on the cover A, or they'll make 50 cents on the cover A. And I have a feeling, and I could be completely wrong, and maybe I'll test this, and I'll be more than happy to test it if I do a book. You BackerKit the shit out of everything, because I think it makes so much more sense. And I think that's the answer. I think it's a whole different way to look at Kickstarter. And again, I've never run one, so I could be wrong completely here. But I mean, I think that's a crazy hell of an idea, because what it's really doing is that you're getting everybody into your BackerKit and you're giving them everything they want at the very end, and you load it up like crazy. But what you do, and this is where I think this is where BackerKit fails, is I would love to have a timed BackerKit. So I would love to have a BackerKit round 1, 2, and 3. Because I'll explain. So you have BackerKit round 1 is 7 days, and then you release another BackerKit 7 days later with different products, and you release a third one.
That'd be interesting. I think that would work super well to get people to not be as intimidated with as many choices. There's significant psychological studies to prove that when you have too many
If
choices, people don't.
Kickstarter hired me, I would change the way Kickstarter would do business with comics, and definitely, and I think I would make them more money they could possibly ever fucking imagine. I think I could add value to Kickstarter about $5 million in the comic industry with about 5 changes that would take maybe 5 weeks to implement. I mean, that's just the tip of what I have in my head. I'm figuring out, and I've never run a Kickstarter. I just understand how to do this, and maybe I'll write to them and say, "Hey, I got an idea, guys. Maybe I'm going to make that email happen." But anyway, enough of my ideas. The Andrew idea hour is over. Unless you want to take over, and your name's Andrew too. So I mean, it's all up to you. This is Hope, guys. She's not happy with me. I just don't want her to bark. But anyway, I do want to talk about one more thing, or maybe 2 more things. I am curious about cons with you because obviously you did a comic with co-publishing it, and then you also have done a lot of board games. And I know board games sometimes appear at Comic Cons. They have their own cons a lot of times, and they also appear at anime cons. And I think you've done a bunch all collectively.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I have several board games at this point.
So my point is that you've been through a bunch of cons. I think you've been across the board, and so I am curious because obviously New York Comic Con is happening this year. I know you're down in Florida, so I don't think you're going to New York Comic Con. If you are, I don't know, are you?
No, not this year.
I mean, you might be doing MegaCon, right? Something like that might have been in the cards.
Yeah, normally I do a lot more local stuff, but
Florida has a bunch of cons. So my point that I'm getting to is that where do you think the con world is going? Because obviously cons appear to be back, but also I think it's safe to say that they're never ever going to be the same again.
I'm hopeful and semi.
No, I mean, I don't mean this way in which that cons are obsolete. What I mean is that I think there's going to be a little bit more safety put onto it. I also think business has to be done slightly different. I don't think you're going to be maybe hugging people so quickly or shaking people's hands. I think that I think wearing a mask isn't a bad idea at a con. I actually think it's a good idea, even when we're past this.
Yeah.
Because con cred is a real thing. And you know what it is? When you have 80,000 people on New York Comic Con or 100,000 people, somebody has something.
Yeah, and so with board game conventions, there's this big one in Indianapolis, Gen Con, that has 60,000 plus people. And you're packed in a confined area. You go to the exhibit hall, and it's like literally everyone's like shoulder to shoulder. You can't move around. Even outside of the COVID stuff, prior to that, people were getting sick all the time just because you're interacting with so many people. And I think that will change, and I think it's better that changes. I do think that might hamper sales for some of those conventions a little bit. And I think that especially with board games, I've started transitioning to do more stuff on my website and do more direct to consumer stuff that's not con related. Just so that I have other avenues for selling my products at the margin that I want to be selling them at. So I do have some distribution for the board game stuff, like I said, but I'm selling it at a much lower margin. So the more stuff I can sell at a higher margin, the more likely I am to be able to fund the artwork and processes for other projects.
That's what I was going to ask next, actually, is that clearly there's a great digitalization pivot coming. I have made more money in the last 18 months in comics because I am able to buy, even at full price, directly from the people selling it to me. And before, it was a lot harder for me to get my hands on this stuff. And I've carried a lot more inventory. And obviously, I've swung a little too far, and I'm actually pulling it back now. And I'm probably going to pull back for the next 6 months just because I got to sell through some inventory. Where I probably took on about maybe $7,000 worth of inventory in the last 18 months, which is about $5,000 over what I would have taken on in 2018, 2019, which is a big jump. I mean, I'm not going to do the math, but taking on that much more inventory plus whatever inventory I was taking on normally is a lot. So I got to sell through some stuff. So I'm now probably in the next 6 months cutting back. I'm right now cash poor, which doesn't help me. I got like $1,600 in my bank account of accessible cash, and I have bills to pay. So there you go. So That's where I'm at, but I do think digital pivot is the way to go. I also think selling directly to consumers is the way to go. That's why I want to create my own variant and create my own exclusive, because the margins on that, if it's 475 for 250 and I could sell them for 15, I'm making $8 in profit.
Mm.
Even with factoring in the artist fee, I'll take out, if I have 250, it's maybe $1.50. I'm making like $6.50 per book in profit, which doesn't seem like a lot, but 250 times $6.50, it adds up relatively quickly. And I have full control over my inventory, and that's at a $15 price point.
Yeah.
So, and that's why if I was to sell my variant to a comic store, maybe if I wholesale them, I would make like $2. So it's the idea that I think cons and what's happened with COVID is going to affect complete digitalization, and I think it's the way to go.
Yeah, I agree.
And so obviously, I do want to give you a chance to self promote. Unless you have anything else you would like to say, you're more than welcome to say anything you would like to say. But obviously, I do want to give you a chance to self promote. So, where can people find this Kickstarter and this comic? Where can people find you on social media? And then there might be people who say, hey, this comic is cool, but I'm really a board game freak. And so where can people, pick up board games? Because I know some of your stuff is probably sold out.
Yeah, I have some stuff sold out. My website is Atheris Entertainment. My name on here, on the bottom of the screen, is how you spell Atheris, Atheris. Where we have Atheris Publishing and Atheris Games. So the publishing is all the comic book stuff, and games is our, obviously gaming division. So you can go to the website and find all that stuff. The comic, obviously, Sam Scams, is currently on Kickstarter, so you can find that there.
Links up above.
Yep. All my social media pretty much is at Atheris Andrew. So if you want to find me on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or any place, my name's Andrew Russell Birkett, and I go by Atheris Andrew most of the time. So.
And I've been saying it all along that you have to support indie. And what that means is that you got to back people's Kickstarters. Whether you're backing digital, you're backing physical, you're pledging without a reward, you're picking up everything. You have to back Kickstarters. You also have to share Kickstarters. That's a big one because, well, you might not be interested in the Kickstarter. You might have a bunch of friends who are, or you got to share it in a group because there's only so many times people can share something into a Facebook group before it gets them in trouble. And so you obviously have to share it. You should be sharing it on your walls, your friends. Tweeting about it is a good one. Also, if you back it, you should be tweeting that you backed it, because if 15 people tweet that they backed it, then it makes it easier for that 16th person to back it and say, hey, I'm interested in this and that. So-and-so just backed it. And if you have 600, people following you on Twitter, and that's great, one of those people might say, man, this looks really cool. I just saw this popped up on my feed. Let me check it out. And then they say, oh, man, that's cool. And even going further off of this, not everybody's Kickstarter is meant for everybody. So let's say that you don't like this Kickstarter, but you love board games. That's another way how to support somebody is maybe you don't like the comic they've done, but you like another comic they've done, and it's on their website. Buy that comic on their website. And that maybe doesn't help the Kickstarter per se, but it helps that artist because sometimes people take money from their other books and then put it into another book, and it goes a long way, or it helps to pay their electric bill to make something happen, or it helps to cover, some of the costs that they maybe had to outlay for art. And so that goes a long way too. And it also supports that project. And, if all of a sudden you have another book out there that, didn't do well on Kickstarter, but then all of a sudden you printed a bunch of copies and they all sold out, well, you're going to probably do another Kickstarter for it. So that's another way how to support artists. And again, sharing it, and it goes a long way, and following people on social media, it is super, super important. So doing all of that matters. And also buy me a coffee, everybody. I need it. Click that link. I need it. I'm broke, I'm poor, and I need it. And I like money too, because money smells nice when you take it out of the bank. And so I would like to go to the bank and take out money so I could smell it again, especially those crisp new 20s on a Friday. Ooh. And wait till the bank gets like brand new 20s. It's phenomenal. But anyway, I digress right there, and I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thanks, everyone, for watching. I hope that you like the comic and want to back it. No matter what, if you have any questions about Kickstarter or want to talk, find me.
And that's a wrap.